I try to teach the younger kids now is I call it play to PR. And it's sort of the self-comparison motive where every day I'm trying to PR my personal best from where I was yesterday or where I was last week or where I was last month. Am I continuing to challenge myself to get a little better than I was the last time I was out here? And that becomes the sort of different motivation, this play to PR mindset, which I think is a lot more stable and consistent across a long period of time, especially when you start going up level by level in competition. And you're not going to be able to win consistently. You're not going to be able to be at the top of the list consistently anymore. You better have another motive to tap into.
Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I am your host and coach, Tyler Johnson. And whether you've tuned into this episode to elevate your mindset, your game, or just your day, you are in the right place. My guest this episode is an OG when it comes to mental performance in the MLB. He's going on his 14th year with the Pittsburgh Pirates as the director of mental performance. He's also worked at West Point as the master trainer and the Army Center for Enhanced Performance. Please welcome to the Elev8 podcast, Bernie Holliday. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, TJ. It's exciting to be here and looking forward to talking with you and sharing some of our passions together.
Yeah, excited to have you. I know you've spent time in professional sports, working with student athletes at the collegiate level quite a bit as well. I guess to kind of give our listeners a little background on yourself, curious to know what led you into kind of the field of mental performance and what you do now.
Sure. Yeah, my background is in sport and exercise psychology, really focusing on the high performance psychology side of things, the psychology of excellence and mental performance. I'm not a trained therapist. I'm not licensed to work with mental health or with mental wellness needs. I'm focusing more on that high performance side of things. And I guess it started back when I was a collegiate tennis player. And I took the game way too serious, took myself way too serious. And for 4 years, I tolerated it at best. I remember at the end of every season thinking, you know what, this is my last season. I'm not coming back next year. I'm done. I don't want to play anymore. And then I'd somehow get myself back the next season. Then I'd play another one. I'd walk away that one going, I'm not doing it again. I'm over it. So I carried a lot of weight in collegiate tennis on my shoulders, and I didn't know how to let go of it. I found myself going to the gym in the evenings my freshman year and just jumping into some of the higher level pickup volleyball games going on. And that suddenly kind of became going out for the club team and then playing on the club team and then traveling with the club team. And I realized that through those 4 years, I hated my tennis experience and I loved my volleyball experience. I think at the end of it, I actually became a much better volleyball player than tennis player. And I was so passionate to get to practice. I was so excited to go work out on my own. And you had to drag me onto the tennis court. And I just found myself fascinated by why was my experience with tennis so much different than my experience with volleyball. And I realized that my mindset and that my attitude had a ton to do with it, as well as the level of expectation I brought to each and what I was focusing on with each. So that got me started into thinking about how the mind impacts the performance, how the mind impacts the motivation. And then got done my undergraduate degree with a degree in criminal justice with a minor in psychology. And I was working in the field, catching shoplifters in supermarkets. And I was shoplifter detective by day and teaching tennis at racket clubs to juniors and to adults in the evenings. And the same sort of feel, like I would tolerate my work going in, catching bad guys trying to shoplift. But then every afternoon and evening, I was excited to get to the racket club, to be able to work with people who were trying to do something hard. They were excited to learn a new skill, excited to stay fit and to challenge themselves. And I found myself in this sort of like early life crisis. Like, what am I going to do with this degree that I'm probably not going to use in criminal justice? And I had the chance to go to the Caribbean to be the head teaching pro at a resort in the Caribbean for a year. Okay. And that's when I went down there and I started reading books on this thing called sports psychology. I had no idea there was an academic field. I had no idea there was a professional discipline. I just knew that the mind mattered when it came to being able to perform at a consistently high level. Yeah. But once I realized there was an academic discipline of sports psychology, I started looking into it down in the Caribbean and realized, you know what, this is kind of what I want to do. And found a bunch of research and a bunch of applied techniques from a guy named Damon Burton. And I had no idea who Damon was, but I liked his stuff. And I looked him up and he was at the University of Idaho. And I called him up from down there and said, hey, I'd love to be a graduate student with you. And after we had a couple of talks, I applied and he let me in. And I did my master's, my PhD with Damon at the University of Idaho and never looked back. I mean, we can go further down how I got to the Pirates, but that's sort of how I got into the field itself.
Yeah, no, I like it. And I think the to tangent real quick on kind of your personal story of going from, you mentioned kind of the expectations of tennis and then having fun at volleyball, and you maybe thriving a little bit more in that environment. As you kind of reflect upon that, as you just did, and then juxtaposition that a little bit with kind of what we see in youth sports these days, how important is it that you're having fun in what you're doing?
I think fun is tremendous. I think fulfillment is more important than fun. And sometimes fulfillment isn't fun. I think that the two can be very
Sure.
different.
Fair. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
as long as there's one or the other thing, is this fulfilling, this experience fulfilling, or is it fun? I mean, either way, it's
Yeah.
good. But I guess if I were to look at it, and this is something, again, I took from Damon Burton at the University of Idaho, are these three types of motivations. Um, there's this play to win motivation. My job is to outperform you, to outrank you, to outbeat you, and to score higher than you. So it's all about social comparison, and I want to outperform and outcompare favorably to others. There's the play not to lose motive, which is my job is not to go out there and be the worst on the field. I don't want to be the worst on the court. I don't want to look like the least talented player. I don't want to be the last kid picked in gym class. And you're highly motivated to not be that guy.
Right.
And I think that's where I was in tennis, and I think that's where a lot of junior players, they have those two motives. And they're playing to win, playing to win, playing to win until they reach a certain level of competition where that's not happening consistently. And then they start to worry more about playing not to lose. And they start worrying about comparing unfavorably to their peers, worrying about looking bad compared to their teammates, looking up, being at the bottom of a list of rankings as opposed to the top. And that creates the stress and the frustration and the anger and the emotions. But there's this third motive that I think I kind of figured out in my volleyball path. And I try to teach to younger kids now. So I call it play to PR. And it's sort of the self-comparison motive where every day I'm trying to PR my personal best from where I was yesterday or where I was last week or where I was last month. Am I continuing to challenge myself to get a little better than I was the last time I was out here? And that becomes the sort of different motivation, this play to PR mindset, which I think is a lot more stable and consistent across a long period of time, especially when you start going up level by level in competition. And you're not going to be able to win consistently. You're not going to be able to be at the top of the list consistently anymore. You better have another motive to tap into. And I think that's what volleyball provided me. And I think that's something that youth sports, if you don't emphasize it early, I don't think they ever get to that third motivation of playing to PR. It's all about playing to win. And then when you start to struggle, you shift to play not to lose.
Yeah. I like the perspective it gives. I mean, the comparison kind of creeps in with our human nature, but when you have a directive, like, play to PR, it gives it a little bit of direction.
Yeah, I'm all for having a healthy desire to be competitive and to kick somebody's butt. And I think you need some of that, but you also need to be able to have this drive to see how good can I possibly be? Can I be better than I've ever been? And to kind of let that be the guiding force in why we pursue sport and what makes sport fulfilling.
No doubt. And so you spent almost about a decade in Major League Baseball. Is that right, with the Pirates?
This is my 14th season, so it's kind of surreal to think that.
Beyond it now. I guess looking back, the field has come, ways. Like, I think, like you said, I didn't know it was a field when I found it, and it was very less talked about. Like I mentioned, when I was in professional baseball in the early 2000s, sports psychology was around, and Ken Reviza's and those people in the world, and yourself got in there. And how far has it come since when you first got into the major leagues? What have you seen it, and how has it evolved, and how has it continued to be maybe more integrated into what a team is doing?
I think it's come leaps and bounds from where it was when I got in 2010. Like you said, there was Ken Reviza and Chad Bowling and a few others who were the heavy hitters in the mental performance field in Major League Baseball, probably about 8 or 9 guys. And we actually formed this group that I always get the acronym wrong. It's like PBG, the Professional Baseball Performance Psychology Group. Right. And there were 7 of us, and we hung out in the hotel during the Major League Baseball winter meetings, and we talked about how can we grow mental performance. And I'm proud to say that that group of 7 now is a group of over 70 that work in professional baseball and mental performance. So we've gone from it being taboo to it being, I want a guy or I want a gal, bring me somebody good, to now I need a department. Yeah. So they're going out there hiring entire departments now, which is kind of fascinating. And if you're just a single individual organization, you're kind of at a disadvantage at this point. It's grown that much.
Sure.
So I think it becomes the haves and the have-nots at some degree. At first there was that stigma of, I don't want to, let my guard down and look like I'm inadequate and don't know what I'm doing. But
Yeah.
now it's like, hey, these guys have an entire department. We don't have anybody. We got to catch up with these guys. We got to bring the department of mental performance specialists in. So it's been exciting to see that growth.
See that growth. And I think kind of grown from maybe one to some of the teams have three to five people on staff taking care of major to all the minor leaguers. Is that right? Pretty much.
Yeah, 3 to 5 is probably the norm at this point
Okay,
for the vast majority of the teams.
sure. And what working with the college student athletes as well. We know we've had some guests that have also kind of experienced those things, and professional athletes have different things connected to their performance, contracts, money, and some of those things that our college athletes don't. So they're always really looking, I think, from what I've learned is, can it give me an edge? Where I think sometimes in my experiences with more collegiate student athletes, sometimes they're looking for some things that, man, life is so hectic as a college student athlete and trying to navigate my world. I just need some things to help me get through the week and maybe through the game, and then hopefully we'll figure out some more. But what kind of differences have you observed with, maybe, for lack of better terms, of grasping for tools in the quickness at which they might grasp and integrate those tools through your teaching?
Yeah, I think between the collegiate athletes and the professional athletes, your point about being pulled in multiple directions is probably a very real one. I spent 6 years at the United States Military Academy at West Point working with Army athletics. And they're not just getting pulled academically and physically, but they're getting pulled militarily as well. So,
For sure.
they go through 4 years with their gas gauge on empty, mentally, physically, and emotionally. They're basically running on fumes in all three of those areas, and they still have to perform at the highest level. So,
Right.
I think for that group, it's really, I always talk about self-talk. We talk about, positive self-talk or negative self-talk. And to me, I want to focus more on effective self-talk. And when I define effective self-talk, I think is your thought process on what's right in front of you and within your control. And that's it. That it could be negative, it could be emotionally driven, it could be positive, but if it's right in front of you and within your control, then you're in a good headspace. And I think when we see these guys at West Point, we see some of these college athletes, their minds are way out in front of what do I got to do next week? What do I got to do next month? I got this big batch of tests coming up in 2 weeks from now. And we've got to travel. We're going to be on the road 3 weekends in a row, and I'm going to fall behind in my classes. And suddenly their thoughts are not right in front of them and within their control. Their thoughts are 3 or 4 weeks out. And it's kind of bring them back into what's right in front of me and within my control. And let's kind of break that down and keep our focus there as much as possible. And then the other thing that my mentor, guy named Nate Zinzer from West Point, he was my supervisor there, been there for like 20 plus years. He always talked about, hardcore stress requires hardcore recovery. And do you take your recovery as seriously as you take your work? Because we all put a ton of effort into work, but we don't put a lot of effort into recovery. Yeah. So, do you take the recovery as seriously as you take the work? So I think with that group that's getting pulled in a million different directions, can we really focus on how do I reacquire energy? How do I restore energy? Do I have a way to hit pause and be mindful, or hit pause and idle for a little while to help recharge the batteries, and almost like kind of swipe off the apps that are open on your phone to get them all off of there? And I don't think as college athletes we do that quite enough. We just want to work in multiple different directions. I think with the pro athletes, it's a lot more that single-minded pursuit and not doing too much. I think what you'll often see with an overmotivated underachiever at that level is they'll finally have time to be just 100% devoted to their sport. Their sport is now their job. They can be completely invested in it, and it's too much too often, and they end up breaking down physically or mentally because they're trying to do too much. So almost learning that they can take a step back and kind of settle in and find what works for them.
We had a recent guest a while back, I believe, you can talk about brought up the running on E, the empty, right? And we use the fuel tank as an analogy sometimes, our fuel and what we've got in the tank. And it made a good point that I think kind of emphasized that recovery was, with this fuel tank analogy, you think you can just go to a gas station, fill up real quick and keep going, right? Just quick fill up, get going again. Where I think, we're starting to learn, especially in this field and when it comes to performance, we're a little bit more like the Tesla. We need to kind of like sit and plug in for a while and not go. It's in charge. There needs to be that actual recharge, and not just a quick fill up. Can you expand a little bit more on just how just the mental and physical recovery is just so important when it comes to, if we want to perform at our best and go after a PR day.
Yeah, we talk a lot about that metaphor of on empty or being able to fill up the tank, and we think about it usually as physically. But I think the mentally and the emotionally piece are just as important at making sure that we're starting to move that arrow up closer to F, up to closer to full on the mental and emotional side. And I like to think about it as the way that we are with our phones, the way that we are with technology and social media. Um, it's almost like being at a red light in your car and you're stepping on the brake with your left foot and still revving up the gas with your right foot. And you're revving at 4,000 RPMs with the brake on, you're still burning fuel and you're not getting anywhere. And I think that's how we can be throughout our days is we're just burning a lot of fuel mentally and emotionally. And there's a great technique that I've heard a lot about, learned a lot about. Andrew Huberman talks about it on Huberman Lab podcast, this idea of stillness. And really this concept of stillness is basically just shutting off all sensory emotion to the best of your ability. Any sensory experience that's around you, what you're seeing, hearing, feeling, experiencing, just shut it all down. He talks about going into a broom closet at work and turning off the lights and putting on sound deafening headphones and just breathing for 5 minutes. And that'll reset the dopamine stores in your brain to be able to persist a little longer throughout the day. And taking these moments of stillness. There's also a technique with this body scan where basically as you breathe and release your breath, you go from head to toe and just think about loosening your face, then loosening your shoulders, then loosening your biceps, then loosening your triceps, and loosening your forearms and hands. And you work head to toe in about a 5-minute period. And again, sort of that reboosts that energy and gets it back up there a little bit. And yeah, we're not going to be able to plug in and get back to full, but they've shown some of the science with blank on his name, but it's pretty fascinating that shows that if you're able to be very deliberate in this recovery restoration technique, this body scan or the stillness, that half hour of that could equate to about an hour's worth of rejuvenation or restoration if you were to take a nap. So it is a little bit better of a way to bring more energy back in a more efficient way.
For sure. I definitely have done the body scans, felt that. I probably need to try to do more of the full stillness and shut down like the Huberman closet. But yeah, I think, and as we kind of wanted to ask you about, meditation and mindfulness too, when it kind of comes to the stillness and some of those things that get tangent in there. I've been meditating for about 8 years now. And when I tracked the behavior early on, I realized that if I wouldn't give myself at least 5 to 10 minutes to meditate, I would never give myself an hour to work out later in the day. And I always just kind of was this thing, and some other athletes have kind of resonated. Like if you just give yourself that moment of stillness, starts to give your self permission to put yourself first and to almost prioritize. Do you see any other kind of side effect symptoms from people that have kind of, done some of those stillness exercises and benefits that maybe they've anecdotally shared about kind of what it's opened up for maybe them?
I think what's opened my eyes to it, in addition to what you talked about, just giving you some permission to take time for you and to sort of reset yourself, is the actual practice of being able to detach from your own thoughts and emotions and just observe them with some distance. There's this idea of stimulus and response. Something happens to us and we react. Yeah. And I think what the idea of meditation does, or this practice of stillness, is it allows us to recognize there's this decision space in between the two, where it's not just something happens and I react. It's something happens and I have a moment to reflect and make a choice. And we had this choice space before I have to respond or react. And we always talk about, do you play emotionally or do you play with emotion? And I think when players play emotionally, something happens they didn't like and they react emotionally to it. Yeah. Versus playing with emotion is something happens and I can experience the emotion and still make a choice that aligns with what I want to get accomplished or what my values are. So I think the side effect that I like isn't really as much a side effect as much as a primary goal of mine is to help our players realize, and this is probably a socialized belief that we all have, is I need to act how I feel. If I'm angry, I need to act angry. If I'm embarrassed, I need to act embarrassed. If I feel defeated, I need to act defeated. Or we need to act in a way that makes it go away. If I feel defeated, I need to make that go away by acting a different way. Or if I feel angry, I need to make the anger go away. But the whole time we're distracted by the emotion and trying to react to that versus recognizing, okay, I can feel a feeling, I can think a thought, and in 3 minutes, I want to have a different feeling, a different thought. So let's not give them too much weight. Let's recognize that I've got this decision space now. what are my goals? What are my values? Well, I value being out of my comfort zone, and my goals are to really challenge myself by doing new things. Okay, now what's the decision that allow me to do that? Not to feel inferior and act on that inferiority feeling that I have. So I think with the meditation and with the stillness and that practice of mindfulness, it allows us to kind of widen that decision space. So it's not so knee jerk from something happens and I react. And we've got this wider space to kind of make that choice, to take a second, go, I'm feeling these feelings. I'm okay with the fact that I'm feeling feelings. I still need to make a choice based on what I value and what my goals are.
Yeah. I like that. It was Charlie Marr, one of those original 7 back in the
He
day.
was, yes.
So when
Bob Tewksbury, Charlie, Chad,
okay.
myself,
All right.
among others.
Bob's been on the podcast. Charlie, I've interacted with a few times. We had some common people we knew from our White Sox days. But he had told me a story, a long time ago about just how Manny Ramirez was just really good at forgetting good or bad day, how it went, really good at putting whatever at bat behind him, and something that he always kind of stuck out from him. Is there a lesson that, or something that you've observed? You don't have to share names to put anyone out there, but a lesson in kind of that, putting the good or bad behind you and moving on, and like you said, moving to the next 3 minutes, whatever that feeling might be, trying to get there. That you're kind of like, wow, they just do it at a different level and maybe with a little less training.
Well, I'll share a story that's not baseball, but it kind of, I think it really spoke to me. We had a guy named Rory Markham come down to the Pirates to talk with our players back in like 2010 or 11. At that point, he was working his way up the UFC ranks, trying to earn a title fight, putting himself in that contender role. And Rory came down for a couple of days and hung out with us, and then we would share stories. And then we had him speak with the players. So he sat with our minor league players, and here is this up-and-coming UFC fighter, and they asked him, "Have you ever been knocked out?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, I've been knocked out on pay-per-view in front of millions of people." And they're like, "How do you handle that?" He's like, "What's that like?" And he goes, "It is demasculating, demoralizing, humiliating, embarrassing. You just feel so small and tiny." And he described it in such a powerful way. It gave everybody goosebumps.
Yeah.
Just then the second question they asked was, "How do you ever get back in the octagon to fight again after experiencing that kind of failure?" And he goes, "Well," he goes, "I've kind of landed on this ritual. I'm feeling these feelings of inferiority and this worry and this anxiety up in the locker room before the fight. And this is after getting knocked out. And this is my next fight several months later. And I'm starting to think, oh my God, this could happen again. What if I get knocked out? This could be really embarrassing, and this could ruin my career." And he goes, "But then music starts playing, and I start walking into the stadium, and the lights are going down, and I can hear my walk-up song, and I get down to the referee. He checks my Vaseline, checks my cup, make sure I'm wearing it. And that's when I tell myself, I go, you know what? You could get knocked out tonight. You could knock somebody else out tonight, but you can knock somebody else out tonight. And that's what gets me back into it. I know that I can. I've put in the work, the hay's in the barn, and it might go good, it might go bad, but I know that it can go good. And that's something that me and some of our volleyball staff at Pitt talked a lot about. Just this idea of there are no guarantees in sports. You're going to step in there. You could get embarrassed. You can embarrass your opponent, but you know that because of the training, you can embarrass your opponent. And it's that can that I think provides people that confidence to step back in there after defeat, or to be able to flush it and say, you know what? I guess another example would be there was a great match played between Andre Agassi and Roger Federer at the U.S. Open Finals, and I happened to catch their interviews on video afterwards. And Roger, after he beats Andre Agassi, 2 future Hall of Famers, and they go, "Roger, you played great. You won. You beat Andre Agassi. You're number 1 in the world. How'd you do it?" He goes, well, I happened to play my best in the finals as usual. And then he giggled embarrassingly because he realized that he said that out loud, and he didn't mean to say it out loud. He's a very humble champion. Right. But to say that I played my best in the finals as usual kind of talks about how they think of their success. That this is something that I trained to do. It should happen. It can happen. And it normally does happen. But then it's interesting because they interviewed Andre Agassi right after that. Again, another future Hall of Famer, number 2 or 3 in the world at that time, and just lost the finals. And they said, "Andre, Roger played great. What do you got for us?" And he goes, "You know what? Roger played way too good today." And just the emphasis on today and the way that today stood out, I think, as I heard it, is, you know what? He beat me today. I can't wait to see him next weekend in the finals. Next weekend's different. Let's go. He might beat me. I might beat him, but I know I can beat him next weekend. So he was better than I was today. And I think that's such a powerful thing to look at your failures and your struggles and your setbacks as short term, temporary, and changeable. I blew it today. I wasn't good today. I screwed up this at bat, and next at bat it might go good, it might go bad, but I know that it can go good. So let's get this next at bat going. So I guess if I were to merge the two stories, that kind of captures what I've seen and what I like to try to promote with some of the athletes.
Definitely. I like that. I played college defensive back, so we had to have the short memory was always preached upon when you get toasted once in a while.
Who was it? Ted Lasso talks about the goldfish,
Yeah.
8 seconds.
Yep. What'd you say? uh, well, something else I wanted to ask about, especially, as you talked about how your time in Major League Baseball and how things have evolved, but maybe some coaches or student athletes that are listening, what are some maybe easy ways that a coach could integrate some stillness or some mental skills into the 90 minutes practice plan that they might have? And if they were, to spend 5-10 minutes, what's maybe some of the best things that they should leverage that time with?
But if we were to go specifically down that route, I think something that I learned from John Mayer, not the musical artist, but the volleyball coach John Mayer, LMU Beach volleyball coach, former AVP player, and rock star dude in general. But I've had the opportunity and the privilege to be able to work alongside him and his club for the last 4 years now. And what I've realized is beach volleyball is really good, probably among the more progressive sports at bringing the mental game into the physical practice arena or the match day. And what I've seen with John and some of those clubs is they start off their practice with what they call mindset, which is just about 4 minutes where they sit in a circle and somebody walks them through, usually the assistant coach walks them through a guided meditation where we talk about this, notice what we're feeling and notice our bodies and notice that this is what we've got to compete with today, or we've got this body and these emotions to practice with today. Let's accept that. Let's focus on what is our intention for today. What do we want to intend to do as we move into our practice setting? What do we want to feel connection-wise with our partners when we're on the court today playing? And then, what's something we're grateful for as we're sitting out in the sand about to go through a 3-hour practice. And okay, now let's go. Let's practice. And then at the end of practice, there would be this moment where we sit down and we either do the same sort of thing, reflecting more, taking inventory of what went well, kind of playing a mental mulligan of what didn't go so well and how would we want to change it next practice. And then maybe even a journaling activity, just talking maybe 3 ups from the practice, 2 downs and some adjustments, and then 1 big takeaway from what I learned from today. Yeah. So I think those are ways that John, at least, his staff kind of bookended it. Right before we went on, just make sure that they had intention, use like this intention-based visualization. And then at the end, it was more of a self-reflection of strengths, things that worked well, things that we need to adjust from, and then what was a big lesson learned or a big takeaway we can stick in our back pocket, carry forward for the next one. And I thought that was a really cool way to do it. And then as I started to get to know the volleyball world, they are really good at doing that kind of thing, setting up intention through mindsets at the start of practice, finding ways to self-reflect in effective ways after practice, so you don't just go home and stew on it. How a lot of athletes think is they can go out there and put together 95 quality reps in the cage, and then they sit around for the next 15 hours and think about the 5 reps that went down the drain and how terrible they are because they're a lousy athlete and they failed those 5 times out of 95 attempts. So to kind of balance that out with that 3-2-1, what are 3 ups, what are 2 downs, what's 1 takeaway, kind of keeps it a little bit more even keeled from one practice to the next.
I think I observed, done, and heard other coaches, do the exercise at the end of practice of like, how'd it go? Most kids will usually tell you the thing they did poorly. Not they're going to talk about the 5, not the 95, right? If a coach asks, and it is important that the coaches, I think Dr. Colleen Hacker, catch them doing it right, catch them doing it well.
Absolutely.
And just, I love that, taking that time. It's interesting because I come around a lot of football guys too, where you get a lot of military, machi, kind of thing in, and it's like, that's something the military always does, is this debrief, this quick reflection on what they did. And it's so powerful, I think, to get to kind of shift things right. I love all the tangible things you said. That's a great way of coaches listening to, in not very many minutes to create a lot of effectiveness. But one of the things I heard you talk about, it's also one of my favorite things, gratitude. You mentioned the little moment of gratitude they have in there. How can gratitude play a powerful role when it comes to maybe shifting our mindset and using it as a regular tool?
I think a couple things jump out at me. The first is There's the old saying in coaching and even in playing that the best way to get yourself out of a rut is to think about somebody else. It's the more we get into this rut and the more we start to struggle and scuffle, the more we think about ourselves and we kind of isolate from other people and we just worry about us. So I think this sort of gratitude exercise to think about what am I grateful for? Who am I grateful for? What do I appreciate and who do I appreciate? It gets us out of ourselves. So I think it allows us to take a moment and see the world and our experiences in baseball or whatever as in a bigger perspective. So it gets us out of ourselves. It adds perspective. And there's some science that's kind of interesting that shows that gratitude not only makes us feel better, but it's a performance enhancer. It creates, a better biochemistry in the body to be able to elevate our performance to that more consistently better levels. So there's even that biochemical experience of gratitude that allows us to play a little bit better more often.
Yeah. I like that. As we wrap up, as you reflect back a little bit, but if you were to go back to earlier, when you were maybe at Idaho or getting into working with athletes earlier in your career on those racquetball and tennis courts, what's some advice you would give to yourself, to someone in the field, that as you get into working with athletes and coaches, looking back, what's a piece of advice you might have wish you knew or could go back and share with yourself?
Probably my hardest lesson learned is, this is going to be kind of philosophical, but it's to know what you're willing to get fired over. And what I mean by that is, I think Michael Gervais calls them first principles. Other people call them core convictions or primary values. But like, what are the things in your life or what are the things in your sport that you feel so convicted in that you're not willing to budge on? Because we want coachable athletes. We want guys to be able to be willing to be coached up. But at the same time, especially as we get more into our careers and more into veteran status, is we better have some first principles or some core convictions, or what I call, these things that we're willing to be fired over. Yeah. And because when we're tested, those are the first things we start to question and second guess. There was a time when I was with the Pirates in 2012, and a lot of my ideas leaked out into the press under my GM's name. He took the heat for it, and the nationwide media blasted him. I mean, they crucified him. It was horrible to read all the terrible things they were saying about him and these ideas he had, when nobody knew they were my ideas, that they were destroying. And not only did he lead effectively through that by rallying the troops and keeping our circle tight and supporting us and checking in on us and growing us when he's being raked across the coals, but he made us stronger as a group through that process. And the embarrassing thing is, when I was young, I was 11 years ago, I was still more embarrassingly older than I should have been at that point. But what did I do every night? I went home and I Googled my name to see if these things were be connected with me. Yeah. How selfish is that? Like, that's embarrassing to say right now, that was my first reaction, was to worry about me, when here's my leader taking the heat for me and making sure that I'm okay and building a better cohesive team because of this. And I'm worried about me. So as I went into the next couple months, all those ideas that I felt very strongly before they ended up in the media, now I'm starting to question, like, maybe I shouldn't teach that anymore. Maybe that's a dumb idea. Maybe they're right, and that doesn't relate to high performance. And maybe I should remove that from my curriculum. And I started second guessing and getting wishy-washy about all these things that I once believed very strongly in. And through that process and through Kyle's mentorship with me through that process, I now realize they're my non-negotiables. I'm now willing to get fired over those things. If the GM or the president says, "Hey, Bernie, we'd love to have you back, but you can't talk about these things anymore. We got to get these out of your curriculum. You can talk about everything else, but not these." I'd have to shake his hand and say, "So long, goodbye." So I think it's, as you start to know yourself and know who you are as an athlete or as a professional, you got to really come to grips with, what are those non-negotiables that you're willing to be fired over? And are you willing to stand your ground and be fired if it comes to that? And I think I couldn't in 2012. I probably can now.
It's a great story. Thank you for sharing and stepping a little vulnerable story too. What did that do, I guess, follow up with your guys' relationship with the GM years later on?
What's our relationship now?
Yeah. Well, how did that, how did it, I'm guessing it's good, but yeah.
He's probably the most influential mentor in my life to this point. We went through a leadership change in about 2019, in which case we brought in a new senior and executive leadership group, and Kyle was moved out at that point, but he lives about 3 miles that way, and we still get to have lunch and talk
Awesome.
um, and connect. So, and I think to your point, if I were to say one more thing, there's strength and vulnerability.
Well
And
said.
I think that vulnerability is probably a performance enhancer as much as gratitude is. So, one of the things I would say to my younger self is don't be afraid to be vulnerable. There's strength and vulnerability, especially when you try new things, do new things, put your neck out there, and risk failing and risk looking foolish. That vulnerability is a very powerful performance enhancer. So I'm glad you brought that word up.
Love it. We could do a whole nother podcast if you want, just on that topic and come back. But I greatly appreciate you joining for this episode, and it was great to thankful for all the wisdom you shared and tangible tools that coaches can take and hopefully support their athletes with.
Yeah, I've had a pleasure talking with you, and I enjoy sharing stories with people that have very similar passions. So it's been really enjoyable, TJ. I appreciate it.